So, Jonathan, it's good to talk to you again. It's been a little bit of a while,
Yeah, it
but
has been. It's been strangely long time, actually.
yeah, yeah. For those who don't know, Jonathan and I were very involved in working together on his publishing company for about a year, and then I had to go off and do other things. And since then, Jonathan and have seen each other sporadically, but it's good to be in the same space to talk about what we love, which is writing, stories, you know, the usual. So, Jonathan, tell us a little bit about what's been going on for you so people know.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things happening kind of simultaneously. You know, we just did a crowdfunder for Snow White and the Widow Queen, but one of the purposes of that was obviously not just for the book, but to start a small publishing company because, I did God's Dog as self-publishing and I ended up being the one to manage everything, all the details of it, and it almost killed me. Like it's just, first of all, it's against my entire personality to be like dealing with where to put like the code bar on the bag and like what SKU numbers and all this stuff. Like it was just way too much into details. It's not that I can't do it. I can, but I can do it to like my own peril. Like it kills my soul to do stuff like that. It was just really hard. So I thought I'm not going to do this again. And so publishing Snow White was a way to start this little publishing company. And Deacon Nicholas helped to set it up quite a bit at the beginning. I mean, he was really invaluable. And then he's like me. He just does too many things all at once. And
It's
so he
true.
actually found someone, Melissa Lauro, who I ended up hiring full time with the money basically from Snow White. I kind of burned how can I say, I burned all the money from God's Dog into like getting it set up. And then basically then the money from Snow White kind of made all that, stabilized that. So I hired her and then Heather Paulington, who illustrated Snow White, as artistic director. She's going to manage all the books, basically, the just manage the process of getting the visuals done and the all that sub typesetting and everything. So I have two people, and so that's been a big, huge change for me, and it's also helped me to kind of pull back from some activities and get involved in other stuff. But to be honest, that's the thing that excites me the most is this fairy tale series, and then continuing God's Dog and expanding that. Also, we're going to start a whole new comic book series that's going to be kind of peripheral to the God's Dog story, where we'll kind of explore legends, universal history type stuff. So in terms of writing, and that's what I'm mostly involved with. Then the other thing that's going on is that I'm in discussion with a lot of different people that want to fund media projects. And so we're looking at whether or not we could have this fairy tale series animated.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's like weird people, like Duck Dynasty people, like just weird
Duck
people.
Dynasty?
Like
That's so
there's them, but
bizarre.
there's all kinds of other people. Like it's just that one though, the most surprising to me. They're actually like extreme. It's weird. Like Duck Dynasty guys, you know how they give this air about themselves as these kind of country bumpkins, but
Hmm.
that is not the case. Like the man I talked to, he was extremely very cultured, very aware. He was reading Father Schmemann, like loves Life of
Wow.
the World, is very astute, and so it's been amazing. I'm working with a Hollywood director on a screenplay for a movie that's going on. And then
Wow.
I'm working with Greg Hurwitz, also writing. We're gonna probably write a series on Genesis, like write a like it could be like a dramatized version of Genesis that would be
Oh,
animated
wow.
probably.
Oh
But
my
that's
goodness.
really at the beginning stage. Like I've just broken up in episodes, but we haven't even started looking at how we're gonna characterize and how we're gonna, because it's hard. It's so, everything's so sparse. It's like if you want to create drama in there, you really have to. And I want to do it in a way that's not artificial, that's
Yeah.
out of the narrative, because people
Yeah.
have done it where it's like it's so not, it's just not, they're just making stuff up. I don't
Yeah.
want to make anything up. I want to go into the story and then pull out the narrative and the drama that's already there in the little nugget. So yeah, so that's mostly what's going on.
Just a few things.
Yeah. Also, there's the summit. The big thing is the summit, and Deacon Nicholas is going to be there. Hope some
Yep.
of you are going to come. That's going to be I'm definitely looking forward to that. It's kind of crazy. It's way too much work again, but I think that'll be a lot of fun to have all these people in the same place, so
It's going to be amazing. And
yeah.
people, you should all let your friends know. We need to have a really packed house for that. Jonathan, that being the case, for myself, I know when I get stretched out as thin as that, um, the first thing to go is reading. But as soon as reading stops, so does my inspiration. And I found myself lately in a place where I couldn't even fathom the idea of sitting down to read, just because the pile of books is so, which is a really bad sign. At that point, you're
Yeah,
not writing,
it's
you're not
really
reading.
bad.
So what?
Audiobooks, man. I'm telling
Yeah.
you, that's my only solution now is just audio. I haven't read. I had read a few things recently that I had to read because I only had it like in paper. Like, yeah, I'm reading this book on the poetics of Boethius, and it was like I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get it in
Yeah.
audio.
Oh, that's a
But
cool book. Who
it's
wrote
a
that one?
great, it's an amazing book. It's by Stephen Blackwood. You know Stephen Blackwood, who
Yeah,
was on
sure.
the Exit Seminar.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he wrote a book about how he thinks Boethius's book is a really a liturgical book almost, and that
Wow.
the meters in the poetry, he says how there's a different meters in all the different poems, and that there's almost like a transformation of meter from a kind of glum, sad state to a transformed state in the end. And
Cool.
he basically analyzes the meter. It's really amazing. It's a little technical, but it's really good. And if not, then because I'm working with Greg Hurwitz, I'm trying to go through all Orphan X, doing that
Oh, fun.
audio.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. They're really good. Like I'm really
He's a good
enjoying them
writer. Yeah.
actually. Yeah, the arc is really the arc of his character is really interesting.
Cool. So obviously people know you as Mr. Symbolism. But how does how do you apply? Do you consciously apply it, or does it happen unconsciously? How do you apply symbolism to the process of writing specifically?
Yeah. So I would say there are two, right? There are two modes. There's a creative mode and an editorial mode when you're
Hmm.
writing. I think everybody experiences that, hopefully, or else you're just going to sit in front of a white page.
Yep,
If you
exactly.
can't separate
Exactly.
those two, you'll never start writing.
That's
So,
so true.
so, so my creative mode is not symbolic, in
Oh,
not
interesting.
explicitly. It's implicitly symbolic
Right.
because I've been working on this forever. It's kind of now in my language. It's underlies my, but I don't think about symbolism in the writing phase. I think about symbolism in the editorial phase. So what I'll do is I'll usually write a chunk. I won't, it's not like I'm going to write the whole text before I analyze it, but let's say I'll write a nice chunk, like a whole page or 2 pages, depends on what I'm writing. And then when I don't have the energy to write anymore, let's say in one sitting, then I'll reread with more critical lens, and then I'll kind of see what I'm doing, and I'll
Hmm.
analyze it and kind of see what I'm doing, and then I just do that back and forth, and I try to be careful not to mix them. And then if you can do that, then it actually, I feel like it feeds each other, because then
Hmm.
you can actually go back into the earlier part of what you wrote and say, oh, if I just added this, then it would connect. People do that structurally, I think, all the time. It's
Yeah.
not just symbolism. If you created some foreshadowing of an event that you think about later, and so I do that for symbolism as well.
So you talked about how Greg is really good at structuring his story arc. It's interesting to hear you talk about this, because but you're uh, consciously or unconsciously mimicking a lot of writers' guides when it comes to the process of writing. Um, but talking about symbolism is not something that people normally talk about when
Mm.
they're thinking about the fleshing out, the critical phase. So now that you have a better understanding of the technical side of things, having been in contact with people like Greg Hurwitz, do you find that symbolism complements structure, or is it just a different aspect of the same thing?
It really is. I think symbolism is structural mostly,
Yeah.
and so you could have someone who, obviously, a lot of people have deeply symbolic writing
Yeah.
without explicit. If you ask them if they did, they'd say, no, I never thought about it.
Hmm.
You know, it's mostly, it's mostly kind of, the thing about symbolism is that it's natural. It's actually very natural. It's not. It's the way the world works. The way that I
Yeah.
approach symbolism. It's just the patterns that underlie attention. So if you get that right, usually your story will end up having deep symbolism, because it will be able to kind of capture people's attention in a specific way. I think that being aware of that, and then, like I said, and then maybe being a bit more um just deliberate about it, I
Hmm.
think then can be helpful. But a lot of people that are the best in terms of symbolic writing are can be complete idiots, like just complete idiots that have no sense of symbolism. Like if you ask them what it means, they have no idea. They can even tell you they don't even know what it means. Musicians are really good at that. You listen to songs and you're like, this is, you listen to, I remember listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers and like
Yeah.
listening to some
Yes.
song and thinking,
Yes.
this is the most symbolically accurate song I've ever heard. And then you could listen to them speak for 10 minutes and they're the biggest idiots in the world. Like they're just complete fools. So that's the thing about symbolism. Is like some people are just kind of like they're more like antennas, right?
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
know what they're doing. That's why, but they're really good at almost like not prophetic, but something akin to prophetic, right? They're more like I said, like antennas or tuning forks. They just kind of vibrate to the right rhythms without knowing why.
It's really interesting. And in fact, I think that there might be a case to be made that people who are vessels like that or antennae are actually better at it than people who are consciously trying to put it in.
Oh
Just
yeah.
because once your critical brain gets involved in the process, you run the risk of becoming pedantic and speaking at your reader instead of telling them a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough. Like it's tough. I mean, that's why usually I think most people that are, let's say, analysts, let's say like Freud wouldn't be writing a story, right?
Yeah.
Or or anybody who is like who's really good at kind of interpreting is not necessarily going to be the same person that writes the story. And so I think, I mean, obviously I'm sure that my writing suffers for it, but hopefully as little as possible.
Well, it's interesting because you do seem to have a very clear understanding of how the two halves of the process need to be very consciously separate. But because so much of what you do is in the symbolism space, which is not creative, or rather it can be creative. Like you can create from the space of the critical brain,
Mm.
but it's extremely painful and it takes a long time and it tends to really drain you and it takes the joy out of the process. So it's not recommended. But so what do you do then uh, to turn off symbolism brain and to get into that kind of more joyful space of creativity?
I don't know like how to even explain it. The thing is that I do that also when I'm watching movies, because people
Yeah.
think that when I'm watching movies I'm interpreting them
Yeah.
symbolically. I'm not. I usually when I watch a movie I just turn that off and I just enjoy the movie. And then when I'm done, then like the next day even, then I'll go back over the elements in my mind and I'll be like, oh, that's what was going on, and I kind of understand it. So I don't know why, but I think for me it's just a normal thing to do. It's also, I think, part of because I mean, I have a family and I have a wife and I have kids, and they don't care about that stuff. Like they
Yeah.
don't care about that symbolism stuff. Like
Yeah.
if I'm playing with my kids, I'm not in the symbolism mode. If I'm like, if I'm hanging out with the most of my friends, like they don't care about that stuff. So I think I've just developed the capacity to turn it off because it's not useful for most of the moments of your like personal life.
I wonder if it's also because you've developed a creative practice already that's not writing, but it's something where you understand maybe not with your mind, but intuitively where
Yeah.
that space is.
But the truth is that I actually started there. So when I was in my early 20s, I wrote 3 plays
Yeah.
that were produced and were played, like big plays with like 20, 30 people in them,
Wow.
and like massive choreographies and stuff.
Mhm.
So, and then I was a painter, and I was also a comic book artist. So this is like in my, like I said, my late teens, early 20s, I was mostly doing creative stuff. And then learning to kind of decipher symbolism came later, and
Mhm.
so maybe that's why too, is that in some ways I started on the
Yeah.
creative side.
Interesting. That's really cool. Okay, cool. Let's move on a little bit. Tell us about your course at St. Basil's. What do you teach, and what are you hoping that your students will get from that course?
So the way that I structured the course is really to go into the Bible and to help people see how the Bible is actually the best source of storytelling, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people because it doesn't have a lot of the modern tropes of storytelling, in the sense of it doesn't describe interstates. It never tells you what motivations of a character are, there aren't descriptions of places. Like, there's just a lot of the stuff that we consider to be good writing today isn't there in scripture. It's very bare bones. It's just like, this happened, this happened, this happened, right? So just a description of a series of events. And so, but nonetheless, the structures that are there, the different characters that are there are very, very powerful. And you can understand a lot about how to structure a cosmos, especially like structure a world using the Bible. And so the course is in some ways about world building and kind of using the Bible as a form of world building. Explicitly, you could say, like we did in God's Dog, it's really explicitly, it's in the biblical world.
Yeah.
So there's a whole mythological aspect to that. But then also implicitly in the sense that, if you look at certain characters, you can really understand different types of relationships that are quite subtle, that are very subtle, actually, that are very powerful and very subtle. And so that's basically how the course is structured. And I try to give examples both in scripture and then go back to either modern storytelling or fairy tales and try to help people see, the patterns.
So, do you think that the reason? So it's very interesting, kind of daring for a lot of. I think a lot of people would consider it to be daring to use the Bible as your world building template. But do you think that there is a particular reason why we want to do that now as opposed to at other times?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that this is something that both you and I have been kind of chasing for like a decade in some ways, kind of lighting that possibility for people to see that, we're in an interesting moment where if you look at what happened in the early 20th century, mid 20th century with people like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, obviously that are examples for all of us, they created this fascinating way of telling stories, which is that they created a pagan world basically that is pointing to Christ. And so, I don't totally understand why they did it that way. There are probably a lot of reasons. Some of it was probably because to do it within the biblical mythological world would have been too controversial, both for Christians and for non-Christians, right? It's like, because a lot of the Christians are kind of literalists where they just had this kind of historical approach towards scripture. And so if you had used that as world building in terms of narrative, they might have been offended. I don't know what it is, but all I know is that I feel like that now is no longer the case, and that we've had interesting events in storytelling in the late 20th century, early 21st century, where people have done exactly that. They've used the Bible or the biblical Christian world as a form of world building, but they always do it with a very cynical and dark approach. And if you think of a lot of the comic books, that's what I grew up in, and there was a lot of that in there. If you think of Hellboy, or you think of some of the things that Grant Morrison did, and then Neil Gaiman, he had this Season of Mist that was kind of in this was in Milton's Paradise Lost, the structure of it with all these pagan gods inside. Yeah. So there has been this very strange capacity. And in horror movies, there's a lot of that in horror movies where it's all kind of a Christian world, but it's a demonic, satanic Christian world. Yeah. And so it seemed like the time is right to do the opposite, which is to actually use all of that and turn it back on its head, or to turn it towards something positive and powerful, and life-giving rather than cynical.
So what your assertion then is that there's something about not simply the Bible as revealed truth, but Bible as literary object that can, so maybe it's both. Maybe this is the question. Is it both? Is it the fact of Bible as revealed scripture and the Bible as literary form that can then inform a writer on how best to structure a world in a believable way?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think that so let's say if you think of God's Dog the way we're doing God's Dog, we're doing it now explicitly. Yeah. That is, we're both using the structure, which is, let's say, the structure from the garden to the flood, right? That's a basic world. If you want to understand how a world functions, from the garden to the flood, that's a basic world. You can understand it in time from the beginning to the end. You can also understand it in space from the center to the periphery. So if you understand that basic structure either as a map that has a middle and an edge, So the center is paradise and the edge is the flood. The water is on the edge, the serpent around the world. Or if you
Okay.
understand it in time as moving from the middle all the way to the edge, then you have an image of a world. And that's one of the best images of the world that you can have. So we're doing it both ways. We're both using it, the structure of that world, in terms of you could replace the elements with something else, right? You don't necessarily have to use the biblical structure. You can have the home in the woods, and you can understand that the relationship between the home and the woods is the same relationship as the Garden of Eden to the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that you find in the woods, the strange, the dangerous, but also the exhilarating, the exciting, all of that is moves towards the periphery. And then what happens in the home, the safety, you could say the cohesion, but then also maybe the danger of the center also as well, which is something
Excessive
like
order. Yeah.
excessive order, the tyranny, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's like that's a structure of a world, but you don't have to use the Bible. But we're doing both. We're both using the structure in terms of this is how our world works, but also that it's the actual world of the Bible, where there's giants and monsters on the edge, and there's holy places and saints at the center, and there's a pillar with a saint at the top of the pillar, and he's basically the tree of the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and he's standing there as a kind of judge over the world. So so we created this double structure, you could say.
It's really interesting. It's also that stylistically speaking, that section of Genesis is one that's the most mythic in its style and the one that's the most conducive to the kind of thing you're talking about, where it's clear that what you're reading is simultaneously events in history, but also events that transcend history and become a kind of pattern or archetype for other events that can happen both in a day and a life and in a historical epoch, which then shifts very soon after that in the Genesis account, where it becomes more personal, more kind of psychological and less mythic. So it's really interesting that you use that particular section as a template, as an archetype.
Yeah, well, it's the thing is that it is the archetype for everything else. So it's like everything in the Bible in some ways has to be read in light of Genesis.
Mm.
Well, actually, ultimately in the light of Christ. But
Yes.
you could say at first at the light of Genesis, and then it takes a while to understand that all of this is ultimately pointing to Christ.
Hmm.
And so you're right. But the thing about the Genesis account is from the creation to the flood is that it's very difficult to read. It's
Yes.
difficult to read because it's a lot of it's just a genealogy.
Hmm.
So you have to you can't just have the scripture. You have to have everything that surrounds it. Like you kind of have to know what the legends were. You have to
Yeah.
understand, how these are connected to, for example, in ancient myths of other cultures, the war with giants,
Hmm.
the book of Enoch, all of this type, the book of Jubilee, all of these traditions that are related to Genesis. That's what I mean too. It's if you just have Genesis on its own, it's going to be a dry read for most people, because it's like, every character just has one, not even one verse. It's like just one verse about them, and then it keeps going.
So, do you think, and this is maybe a counterintuitive question, but you talked about how in modern writing, the kind of reference point towards these patterns and archetypes has become one of postmodern cynicism and kind of deconstruction and laughing at everything. But would you say that the skill of world building in itself is it getting better or worse right now in the general culture? What do you think?
Oh, right now?
Yeah,
Well,
right
it's
now.
definitely getting worse.
Mm,
It's worse, and it's interesting, but that also is a great opportunity for us. It's a
yeah.
wonderful opportunity because, and I want to say this. I'm going to say this because a lot of people won't like me, but I think that Tolkien is partly responsible for this,
Okay.
right? And
Expand.
and I'll and I'll
Defend
say
yourself,
why.
sir.
No, I'll say why, and I will say why. It is because the cosmology in Scripture and the cosmology that exists also in ancient myths and in fairy tales is full. That is,
Mm,
it usually accounts for both sides of each element of the structure. So it's hard to do because people don't tend to do it. But when you read scripture, you can actually read scripture from the point of view of most of the characters.
yeah.
Like you can read the book of Exodus from the point of view of the Pharaoh,
Hmm.
you'll understand a lot of stuff if you read it from the point of view of the Pharaoh once. It doesn't mean you have to adopt his point of view,
Right.
but you can read the story of King David from the point of view of Saul,
Yes.
and it's not completely it's not incoherent. It actually
Yeah.
makes sense. You
It's
can actually
polyphonic.
decipher Saul's intentions, and
Hmm.
you can decipher why Saul is acting the way he is, even though ultimately you might disagree.
Yep.
You can actually find sympathy for some of the things he does, for the same reason that you can actually sympathize with the Pharaoh. Imagine the Pharaoh. He's like, oh, you want to leave? Do you want to leave for 3 days? And you want to take everything. You want to take your all your things and your animals, and you're trying to tell me that you're going to leave for 3 days. Like, I'm not an idiot. Obviously, you're not coming back. Stop, don't stop pretending. Anyway, I'm
Yeah.
just saying you can do that. But in Tolkien, like Tolkien's, his intention was that he create clear good and evil,
Mm.
that everything be clear in terms of good and evil. And so because of that, I think that he set up, not on purpose, but he set up postmodernism, which is he set up people saying, oh, well, we're just going to read it upside down.
Yeah.
We're just going to do it upside down. But in the
So
more ancient,
you get George R. R. Martin
exactly, you
immediately
get
after
you
that.
get a dark mirror version of him. And
Yeah.
so if you think of, for example, the Iliad, right? You can read the Iliad from both sides,
Yes.
right? You can read the Iliad from the point of view of the Trojans, and it makes sense. And I think that that's why, in some ways, the postmodern cynical version is a reaction to that. But the best way now to answer is to answer with fullness, because
Mm.
people won't know what to do with that. Because
I
people
love that.
expect you now to react with like, oh, good guy, bad guy, here's light, here's dark, this is
Yeah.
clear. Like, it's so simple and it's just good, But no, it's like we can answer with subtlety in a way that points to truth, but also is not just naive, but also has and that's why, like, for example, our fairy tale series.
Yeah.
The fairy tale series, this is a good fairy tale series. The fairy tale series is a great example, right? Ancient fairy tales are messy and dark
Yes.
and weird, and there's stuff in there that like will keep you awake at night, even as an adult. Okay.
Hmm.
Now, Puritans come along, right? Especially in the 19th century, and they're like, we got to clean all this up. And then they just clean it all up. And then they
Yeah.
turn fairy tales into morality tales, which they aren't.
Yeah.
And then they turn them into clear morality tales. And then the postmoderns are like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on there. And then they uncover all the dark stuff. And now they're like revealing things to everybody. And they're like, you don't understand what's really happening in these fairy tales.
Yes.
So the final answer to that is not to go back to the puritanical stuff, is to say, oh, no. I will give you a subtle reading that accounts for all the things that you think you see in there, but that will ultimately be pointing to something beautiful and true nonetheless, that will ultimately bring you towards something that is beyond just the cynicism of it. And so it's like, do you want to know if my fairy tales are going to talk about sex? Of course they're going to. There is a reference
Yeah.
to sexuality, an implication of sexuality in them. But I'm not gonna dive into that like a dirty old man. Like, I'm gonna suggest it. I'm gonna help to point that towards something true and beautiful. So anyways, I think that's the solution now, is to say, let's be better. Like, let's really be better in every way in our storytelling.
You
Then,
know,
sorry.
it's really interesting that you put it that way. So I will quickly defend our dear Lord and Father J.R. Tolkien, and I will say that what Tolkien's doing is actually more. I think what Tolkien's doing is more nuanced than that.
Okay.
In that he has two levels of morality, if you like, going on at the same time. One is the sort of cosmic, where it's important for him to establish the reality of there being ultimate good and ultimate evil. But notice that the ultimate good doesn't appear as an incarnate reality, right? This is a pre-incarnate world where the presence of the ultimate good is only hinted at, right? It's as something like the star in the darkness or the possibility of providence, something like that, right?
Mm.
But the very real presence of a dark lord makes it seem like it's black and white. So you have people like George Martin who call Tolkien a black and white writer. But if you're looking at the level of the human characters and the elves, it's all a lot more complicated. And of course, I'm just stating the obvious, but I think that it's interesting because I think there's something to say about the Bible being more nuanced in
Yeah.
some ways than that. There isn't this dark lord figure in Genesis, not really, right?
Okay.
It's a lot more subtle.
It's really more subtle. Like, it's so subtle that it's like this. like if let's ask the question, like we can ask the question. It's like, when the serpent said, if you eat of this tree, you'll become like God, was he lying or was he
Yeah.
telling the
No,
truth?
he was telling the truth.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, that's a subtle, and it's like, you only see it in Jesus. You see the answer in Jesus, which is, it's like God was telling the truth and the snake was telling the truth. And Jesus just said yes to both. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, it means I will be God and I will die. Those are the two things. It's
Yeah.
like Adam wanted one, didn't want the other.
That's right.
And so he started blaming everybody for
That's right. That's
his
right.
thing.
That's right. That's brilliant. I love that. I haven't heard you say that before, so that's really
Oh,
cool.
really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so I will say one thing before we move on, and that's that this is what Dostoevsky does really well. And
Yeah.
in a lot of postmodern literary analysis of Dostoevsky, they claim that the critics claim that he had no preference for the points of view of his characters
Mm.
in the novels, which is not true, of course. If you read Diary of a Writer, you know that the man had very definite opinions about things, especially Catholics. But we won't go there, which is unfortunate. He had very definite opinions about Catholics, but his novels, it's polyphonic, right? They call it polyphony, where
Mm.
the every possible point of view is given a free weight. And in some cases, like in the Brothers Karamazov, which of course is book one of three, books two and three were never written because he died. It seems like he's giving a preference to the arguments of the intelligent and rational atheist,
Mhm.
at least during certain parts of it, because there is no answer to the arguments of Ivan. So, and how many people have been affected positively by the vision of Dostoevsky, by his ability to harmonize all of the strange um, contradictions of humanity and
Mm.
present them in a beautiful and compassionate, first of all, way. So I think there's something to be said about that as well.
Oh, definitely. And I think that that's really the answer. The culture war stuff is just boring and stupid.
Yeah.
It's just annoying, because it's like, as Christians, we can understand, like, we can totally understand the idea of, not only understand, but we're called to, let's say, have compassion for the marginal, have compassion for those that are excluded. It's all part of us. And so the idea is rather to be able to show things in their proper light, and to be able to give the right voice to the different aspects of reality, and to not be shy to show when something is self-destructive. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, I can have compassion for someone who's destroying themselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I can write the point of view of a drug addict,
Yeah.
and write it with compassion, while also demonstrating that their behavior is basically going to destroy them. And I think that that's the best way to go about it, is to write with kind of truth, and but also compassion.
So we're talking a lot about big cosmic realities, archetypes, and things kind of out there and sometimes difficult for people with particular needs to imagine. So as a writer, one of the biggest temptations that writers have, especially writers of fantasy, is to get lost in the cosmic, is to get lost in the huge, large scale realities of things.
Yeah.
Some of you in the room know who I'm talking about, and I'm talking to you. Yes, I won't name any names, but um, for Tolkien, it wasn't like that. He didn't start with the cosmic and funnel into the particular. He started with a sentence, a language. He developed an entire world um, to inhabit a created language that he wanted to make just for fun. So, what do you think? Is there a common place in your vision of how world building should start? What is the particular point where a writer should start? Is it an object? Is it a character? Is it an image? What is it?
Well, I don't know what it has to be, but what I do know is that, in terms of understanding cosmic structures, is really to think fractally, and to act fractally, which is that the only in a story, the way to show that, if you want to embody if you want your cosmos to have power, it has to be embodied in a particular, and there's no other way, and that particular then reflects the cosmic structure. And so you want things to function at every level, which means that you need characters that people care about, and you need their stories to be a story that people can care about,
Yeah.
and they will be participating in a cosmic story. So think of, like, think of like disaster movies. Like disaster movies is a good way to think about this, right? It's like in a disaster movie, what they'll always do is they'll pick one story or two or three stories, and then you'll follow the people in the story, despite the fact that like
Yes.
millions of people are dying around them. You can't focus on millions of people dying. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's like it's just numbers. It's completely abstract. And so, and you can see that, by the way, this is where Marvel like failed dramatically right now with
Yes.
their stupid multiverse, where it's like entire universes are disappearing, like
Yeah. Who
billions of
cares?
people just vanished. And it's like, oh, and you think I'm gonna care about that? Like, I don't even know what that means. What the hell are you talking about? Like, entire timelines have been destroyed, and it's like people are dying. It's like, okay, I'm sorry. This doesn't mean anything to me, right?
Yeah.
It has to happen in the life of the people that you care about in the story. That's the only way for you to be able to render the drama of a cosmic disaster. Doesn't mean you can't have a cosmic disaster in your story, or you can't have cosmic stakes, but it means
Yeah.
that those cosmic stakes have to be embodied in something that is at the human scale, because we are humans and that's what we care about. So
The,
I think that it has to, you can play obviously between the two, and like
yes.
by giving cosmic hints, you are reinforcing the intensity of the thing that the
Yep.
people are caring for, even if it's just a stupid MacGuffin. Like if you've got like some MacGuffin in a story where it's like people are running after it and chasing after it and trying to get it, it's like you need to focus on the drama of the actual people fighting over the thing, hinting to its importance, giving some hints and helping you understand how powerful it is. It's going to be great, but you have to always play between the two. If you don't tell us why the MacGuffin's important, then I don't care.
Yeah.
But if you just talk about how important it is and I can't see the human stakes, then I don't care either. You have to find the connection between the two.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's so this the way we're looking at it here is that you're making the cosmic important by focusing on the particular, by kind of really funneling it down and putting it into the immediate stakes of a single person or a single family or a single nation, preferably just a single person. And of course, those of you who have taken my recent class, Motivating Your Lazy Characters, the opposite is also true. The way you really make a small character's goals and motivations and conflicts important is by laying over them something that is cosmic in its significance. So
Mm.
this is where it becomes practical, where the world building really begins to sing. It's not in how fancy your maps are. It's not how good your magic system is, which, by the way, my personal bugaboo is not that Tolkien had a clear division between good and evil. It's that uh, fantasy went the way of discrete magic systems that have to be scientifically explained, which I hate. I can't stand it. We could talk about that forever. But getting back to the point, like, so those of you who are in that kind of stage of what is my character doing within that scene, it might sometimes even be helpful to think that ultimately the character wants a concrete goal in a scene, and there's a concrete conflict in the way, but there's also internal and overlaying deep, profound cosmic realities that are informing the needs and desires and drives of every human being. And if you're cognizant of the fact that those things are there, and if those things are actually intertwined with the realities of your world, especially if it's in fantasy, you can create something that's very, very powerful.
But you can do it like you can also do that if you're creating something which is more every day, like, because
Yes.
a love story is a cosmic story,
Yes.
right? So if you have a romance in a story, in a script, or in a novel, that is participating in a cosmic pattern. And so, but obviously you want to be able to, like, the intensity of the emotion and the feeling is something that everybody can feel, like, can identify with, because it is this cosmic thing. So you always have to be able to play between the two. Like you want let's say you want a romance to be sufficiently idiosyncratic to the characters for it to feel gritty and real and connected, but you also want it to be universal enough that everybody will care about it.
Yeah.
So if you make something too idiosyncratic, then no one cares. And if you make it too universal, again, you have that same problem. So it really is. I mean, we're Christians, aren't we? Like, that's the whole idea. Like, we believe that the world is that the world is liturgical, and that
Yes.
the incarnation is the anchor for reality. And so that means that's how the world works. It works between microcosm and macrocosm.
And of course, that's why, as we've talked about plenty of times, that Tolkien was exactly right when he said that the historical manifestation of the hero's journey means that every hero's journey is then somehow participating in the great story. And it's also one of the sad things that in the conversation with Ben Hadke, when you suggested to him that the greatest story had already been told, that the immediate response for so many writers is, well, then why should I write? Because then I can't reach towards anything. And of course, the opposite is true. So
Yeah.
let's answer Ben again, but from a world building perspective. Why is it the fact that the world building reality of Christ on earth as hero incarnate, as hero, why is that something that is freeing for a writer as opposed to limiting?
Yeah. There's a few things. First of all, it's because it's like that story is just not like, you're not going to get to the end of it. I don't know what to tell you. It's like, that's the story of Jesus is just unbearable. Like, it's an unbearable story. It has too much in it. It's hard to, I mean, especially if you've been meditating on it for several years, at some point you realize just how inexhaustible it is.
Yeah.
And it offers, in its inexhaustible nature, it offers all the panoply of human possibility. And so, and even in the church, right? It's not just in stories. In the church, like, we have monks that manifest a certain aspect of Christ. We have preachers that manifest a certain aspect of Christ. We have all these different elements that happen in the church, people who care for the poor, people who like, we have all these things, and it's all little, like, it's like little slivers of what Christ offered in his incarnation. And I think that in some ways what we have a key, like, we have this key to the greatest, like, treasure trove of story that humans can think of. And so if we understand it that way, and if we dive into that story, then all of a sudden, like, you can see all these mirrors in all the other stories. You can see that kind of mirroring all through reality. And it's like, why wouldn't you want the key to that? Like, that's amazing. The thing, the problem though, is that we have the key and we don't even know how powerful it is, even if we have it. So it's like, you're not going to get to the end of that, because even if you have the key, you're still going to figure out that it unlocks doors that you hadn't even thought existed yet. So,
well, it's like the premise is incorrect in the first place, right? The idea that in the uncovering of some original story, original idea, brand new, never before seen world,
yeah, ridiculous.
there's something that's going to be somehow revealed to mankind that hasn't been revealed before. And this is the ironic thing. This is like the strange and tragic irony of postmodernity, in that everybody's told that they have to create their own self, they have to create their own values, but that creation of self and creation of values only makes sense when it is judged and assessed by others, because you yourself being within it can't possibly determine whether or not it's ultimately worth it. So, you're told to do this yourself, but you will never be sure if it's true unless you subject it to others. And then if you do that, then you need to subject it to a pattern. And then, so you're locked in this,
Yeah, you're locked in this ridiculous thing.
and the funniest thing in storytelling terms, you have authors who are straying very far from the Christian roots, especially in fantasy and sci-fi, and especially in fantasy. So you'll say that you're creating some fantasy world that has no analog to the real world. Not really. It's not supposed to be in any way similar. It's supposed to be a completely different place. But what the reader will expect then, the first thing that a reader of a fantasy that's set in a mythical, imagined secondary world that has no reference to this world, is what historical period are they basing it on? So there's still, like, the reader is automatically clued into the fact that you can't create a completely original universe. So they're already testing out, is this more like ancient Rome? Is this like medieval Europe? Is this like a
Yeah.
Slavic fairy tale? What's it like? So if you're going to do
It's
that
also
anyway,
because we have to care for their stupid story. Like, people have to care for your story, and care doesn't appear, like, you don't care for anything. Like, if I spread a bunch of random dots on a thing and I ask you to care about that for hours, it's like, you're just not going to care. And so
yes.
that's the problem, is like, try reading Samuel Beckett, like, not the small works, but like well, I forget what it's called. It's called The Unnameable. Like, you ever try to read that? Try to read that. Like, I've read it, and I mean, it's like, it's really hard to care for a long time, to have someone basically saying the same sentence over, like, for like 20 pages. This is difficult to care about. It's the same, like, read Finnegan's Wake and realize just how much of a dead end modernism is, because it's like, yo, you're super smart. You've created all these really elaborate references and patterns and everything, and you're really innovative, but no one wants to read your book. Everybody has it on their shelf, but nobody's
Hmm.
ever finished it because
Hmm.
it's unbearable. Like,
Yeah.
that's the problem.
And the reality is, getting back to your essential point about how we really should be using the archetype of scripture for the substructure of our writing. Nobody's really done the definitive version of this, and it nobody ever will. Like,
Yeah.
it's an endless pool of possibilities. Like what Tolkien calls it, like the cauldron of story. And of course, the whole point is what you're talking about is the readers want resonance. They want that moment where it's not simply an Easter egg, because Easter eggs are cheap.
Yeah.
Easter eggs are all about like closed off borders. They want this. They want something that's similar. It's called resonance, right? It's
Mm,
where they realize that they are resonating with a reality that is true on several levels,
yeah.
and that other people resonate on that level with them. So it's a
Yeah.
moment suddenly of communion inside
Oh,
a
that's
solitary
exactly.
experience.
So this is what we like, Deacon Nixon. I guess in some ways we've been thinking about this forever.
Mhm.
And it's finally, I feel like it's interesting because we're finally having the opportunity to kind of put it in practice. I had this term, I call it like apocalyptic storytelling,
Yeah,
which is the idea that in some ways, like there are some of the postmodern tropes are really actually, we can use them really
yeah,
powerfully. And so the idea of an Easter egg, for example, the idea of the Easter egg is very interesting to use because it is this recognition. It's a moment of insight, but usually what happens in the modern movie or the modern story is that it's a very empty moment of insight. It's
yeah,
just like, oh, I'm on the inside, I get this, ha
yeah.
ha ha,
It's
right?
an
I'm the
exclusion
yeah.
automatically. Yeah.
But you can use that Easter egg actually to create deeper insight into the story. And so, like, I'll give you a little example that we're doing in the fairy tale stories, right? Um, so a good example would be like there are two stories. One story is Snow White falling asleep, and the other story is Sleeping Beauty falling asleep. Right? It's
Hmm.
like those are the same tropes,
Yeah.
and so you can use those analogies instead of just like making a cynical comment about how they're the same. And you could create visual references just to show that I know they're the same. You can actually use them to give insight into both stories.
Hmm.
So you can write them in ways that will then reveal to people what those stories are. And so, like a little thing that we're doing in the fairy tale book, a little example is that, right, in Sleeping Beauty, the king removes all the spinning wheels, right?
Yeah.
So we just told the story of the valiant little tailor. And so the valiant little tailor loses everything in the story of Sleeping Beauty,
Hmm.
right? And so it's like he appears again as an Easter egg,
Hmm.
but then the consequences of the king's actions are on the character that you cared about in the other story. And so
Yeah.
it's like you're using Easter egg mechanisms, but you're doing it in a way that's trying to reveal how serious. Because when you read Sleeping Beauty and it's like, oh, he just took away all the spinning wheels,
Yeah.
and
You
it's
don't think
like,
about it. Yeah.
okay, whatever, let's keep going on with the story. It's like, no,
Yeah.
he basically removed one of the main like living things that people live by or that were able to make clothes by in their kingdom. So if like he can show the consequence by using a little Easter egg mechanism, but it's
Hmm.
giving you insight into the story rather than just yeah. So
So
there's a
that
little example. There's millions of ways you can use that.
and of course, this is actually quite scriptural, and the point is made beautifully by Robert Alter in his book, the was it narrative structure of I can't remember the title, but he makes the point that a lot of people don't recognize. But Christ coming to the Samaritan woman at the well is supposed to make you think of Jacob. It's
Oh
supposed
yeah,
to make you think of all of the
the women
accounts of
met at
someone looking
wells.
for a wife.
That's right. Oh,
And
definitely. That's exactly what it is. And so then he doesn't even have to, that he's marrying her, but he doesn't have to marry her because obviously Christ is not going to marry some Samaritan
yeah,
woman, but he's still marrying her narratively.
that's
And so
right.
you can have it all. Like you
Hmm.
can have Christ remain a virgin, not actually marry her in physically,
Yeah,
but because of the way the story is told, he's marrying her. So you end up having everything. Like Christ does that all the time. Like he's constantly he's able to have it all, like in his story for some
yeah.
reason.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
Okay, let's get back to the mundane. If you could focus down on a single essential writing skill, what do you think it is? The most important writing skill you need?
I mean, I think that you need to understand story. Like, I
Mm,
don't know what to say. Like, I think that's the best thing you can get, is that to understand why a story starts and why a story ends and why you would care in the middle. Like, it sounds boring, but that's basically what you can, if you get that, a lot of other things can be healed, if you understand why people care about things. Maybe that's even better, to say why people care about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, of course, the structure of story, because the
Yeah.
structure of story mimics human response to life.
Yeah, to attention. Exactly. It's a compressed version of what we care about in our daily life. So I would say, to not, and I think probably in this crowd, I even don't have to say it, but like to obviously take seriously things like fairy tales, because they're really contracted versions, and the Bible stories, like they're great because they're little contracted versions of stories. And so you can understand the story structure in a few sentences.
Yeah.
Like, you can have a 5-minute story. You can tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood in 5 minutes. So it's great, because it's actually like you have little maps in your mind. So then you can expand these, and you can mix them, and you can match them with other versions, and you can create novels and all kinds of more elaborate and more subtle things. But ultimately, the patterns they're the same.
Yeah, I love that. So when I first approached you at asking you to join the faculty, what was it that made you want to support the mission of St. Basil's Writing Workshop?
I think that I really, and I sincerely believe this. I think that Christians hold the future of storytelling in their hands. Like, I really do. But I think that there's a lot of work to be done for that to happen. For a long time, for several generations, most Christian storytelling has been boring and just not just ideological and all that. And I think that now, there's all these things happening all at once that make it possible, I think, to create powerful stories from the Christian point of view that are transformative. And it's like a zeitgeist. It's hard to explain. It's not like one person's responsible for it. It's just something that seems to be happening. And to watch people like Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw convert, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think it's time. So
that's awesome. I love it.
And Orthodoxy, by the way, offers the best cosmology of them all. Like, it just has preserved that cosmological vision more than any other form of Christianity, let's be honest. And it also has the transformational aspect, right? Because one of the problems with a lot of the Western Christianity is that it was treated with legalism, right? This idea that, right, Jesus came and was sacrificed, because you did these sins, and now you have to have a sacrifice. So Jesus dies and takes the sins and all that kind of stuff that is really boring. Like, it's just boring. It's just not, like, why would you care about a story like that? Really? Like, that's not what makes us care about stories. It's like, but I think that the image of Christ going into death and taking on death, in order to transform it into glory, going into Hades and taking human nature and lifting it up to the Father. It's like, that's a story. Like, that's the story. That is the story. So it's like, if we can understand that, then we have all the keys for the future of storytelling.
But it's hard. So we
for sure.
We need to study. We need to work. We need to study. We need to help each other. We need to be all together and do it all as a group. Which is why it's such a pleasure to have you as part of the faculty, and why it's been so wonderful for me to just be on the margins and fringes of the thing that's happening around you. But let's open the floor up to the people who are here. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. So if anybody wants to jump in and immediately ask a question out loud, please do. In the meantime, I'll be looking at the chat and see if I can find something in there.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I want to excuse me. I'm on my phone, moving around a lot. I have a story idea that involves Christianity, the ideal of Christianity pitted against the ideal paganism, specifically Norse paganism. And I want both I basically want Christ and the Norse god to exist simultaneously in some form. How would you suggest creating a world like that where it's not actually seeing postmodernism like in Hellboy and Neil Gaiman? I actually read American God to give an idea. I'm like, well, this is kind of stupid, but this is a fun story. But this is not what I want. How do you do that kind of respectfully, where you don't make Jesus into a hippie or on the same level as
Yeah.
every other God?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just say this, like, American Gods is hilarious. Like, it's actually hilarious. It's hilarious to the extent that he doesn't really dare take on the question of Christ. Like, you know,
Actually,
like
he did. Okay, so there is a cut
the chapter that
section.
he didn't have in the book, I think, that he left
He
out.
wrote it. So the special 25th anniversary or the 10th anniversary edition of it has the deleted Jesus scene. He wrote it, and
Yeah.
it's bizarre. It's utterly bizarre. He's wearing a cap, and he's like, sort of American Mall Jesus. He's white. He's wearing a cap. He has a. It's very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the verse version, like, there's one sentence where Odin says that he saw him in Afghanistan hitchhiking. He says, oh, he does pretty well here, but I saw him hitchhiking in Afghanistan. And I was like, you know what? Actually, you're wrong. Like, even in Afghanistan, if in your world, in your Neil Gaiman world, he still would have been like towering over all you little pesky the pagan gods, even though, like, even if they're Muslims, like, he still would have been towering over your little pesky Norman. Anyway, so you see my annoyance with Neil Gaiman. But so I would say Parker, honestly, I would warn very, very much about making Jesus a character in any of your stories. Like, really, I would be very cautious, and I would warn against doing that.
Yeah. So I don't mean to dominate the conversation, but just to clarify, the story I'm thinking of is basically I wouldn't say it's an interpretation or adaptation, but it's basically the story of Beowulf intertwined with the story of Ragnarok. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but it basically, I had an idea of after watching a bunch of Mike Flanagan horror movies, having a ghost story where the family is haunted by Loki, Grendel, Freya, Freya, Grendel's mother, and Odin, and at the end of the dragon. But in the middle of it, the main character basically realizes that the path down symbolic Ragnarok is not the one he wants to go down, and 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 he wants to go toward Christ, or symbolically. Like, I don't know if that made any sense, but
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are all kinds of stories that you can tell. Like, that, I think that it depends how explicit you want to be in your characters. Like, do you want them to be actually Loki and all these gods, or do you want them to be, you want to use them as models for certain psychological transformations that the characters go through? Like, that's also a possibility that's maybe sometimes easier to write. And so if you want to understand what these, like, I would say, if you want to write these gods into your story, you have to understand what they are and kind of what types of forces do they represent, and what motivations in humans they represent. And if you're going to have them, so think of how the Iliad is written. So when the way the Iliad is written is you have the gods floating above acting, and then you have the human characters embodying and manifesting the whims and the problems that's happening in the world of the divine. So if you wanted that to happen, you would need to make sure that it's not like just arbitrary, but that your characters are going through certain transformations that are reflected in the nature of these principalities. And then you could end the story, like you say, where the character realizes that these, this desire for power, let's say, like a war god, or this desire for nature, or this kind of monstrosity, let's say, these different characters that he finds in the north, that you find in the northern sagas, that they're not sufficient, and that love and self-sacrifice is the key, and so you can have that represented either explicitly as, the characters could find their final resolution hiding in a church, or there's different ways to do it that is subtle, but it's definitely possible. You just have to be aware of what you're playing with, and not make your gods, like Neil Gaiman does, into basically idiosyncratic beings that could just be Joe next door and has no characteristics, that has very few characteristics of what the principalities that they're trying to embody.
Nathan, I wanted to go ahead. It's your turn.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I see. If I'm not mistaken, you have Jack Kirby's The Fourth World Omnibus behind you, Jonathan. You mentioned earlier that you're expanding.
Right there.
You mentioned earlier that you're expanding the story of God's dog with the second series. Are you using that as like a point of reference? Because he's like the king at world building, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can say it like as a reference and as a warning, like, because I think that the Marvel Comics vision of gods is the worst possible way of understanding how gods work. But at the same time, I think that the way in which stories are mixed together, like the way in which he crosses stories over and then breaks them off into other stories and stuff, like that's definitely something that I can learn from Kirby. I also really like Kirby's compositions. Like, I really like his style, and so he has a weird iconic way of drawing, like especially a little later, like in the 60s and stuff and 70s, like, and so I think that that's something that we can steal from, in terms of finding a way to tell stories visually that are iconic to some extent, that have a certain structure in terms of even the panels, how they're done. But yeah.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yes. So I wanted to ask, still chewing on your critique of Tolkien that came up, talking about, like, being maybe, and it's like, because I was thinking, as Orthodox Christians, we believe that there are such things as demons, and there are such things, and there are saints, like, so there is examples of ultimate evil and ultimate good in some way. And so how far do you think that can be pushed in a story, or do you think that is something that, like, do you understand it? Because I'm not sure how you should like, there's a question of ultimate good and ultimate evil within a story. Is it just a matter of you always have to?
So let's play it out. Like, the thing is, the problem in the Bible, not the problem, but the richness, one of the richness of the Bible is that the characters are not, they don't tell us what the reasons for why the characters act. Like, it doesn't say this is the motivation of the character. So let's like go all the way heretic here. Like, let's just go all the way. Can you read the story of Jesus from the point of view of Judas? And the answer is obviously yes. The answer is obviously yes, you can. You can understand the point of view of Judas. You can put yourself in his shoes and say, this Messiah has come. He hasn't done the things he's supposed to do. You're right. He's not beating the Romans. He's not doing all these things. He's supposed to do this. Also, being a kind of poisonous in your heart. Obviously, he's clearly has poison in his heart, and that's shown in the story. But you can still kind of understand his motivations. You can understand the motivations of St. Peter, right? Who, like, even the denial of Peter. It's like Jesus tells Peter, take your swords. He takes his sword. He gets to the place, and then it's like, okay, now's the moment. Takes his sword out, and Jesus is like, no, put the sword away. And so you can actually understand the story from the point of view of St. Peter, because it's like, imagine you're in that position, and then all of a sudden, it's like you take the sword out. Jesus told you to bring it. You cut the guy's ears off, and then Jesus reproves you right there in front of the Roman, saves the Roman, and you're like, what the hell is happening? And then everybody scatters, and then everybody's there, and then, okay, it's like, now the Messiah is going to show himself, and then Jesus keeps just not doing anything. He's not doing anything. He's taken to court. He's not doing anything. So what's going on? So it's like, that's what I mean, is that it doesn't mean that what St. Peter did isn't wrong. Of course it's wrong. It doesn't mean that what Judas did isn't wrong. Of course what Judas did is wrong, but you can understand it. You can put yourself in their shoes, and you can also see your own behavior and understand that you've gone down that road yourself, right? I don't see how Sauron is a mystery to me. Like, Sauron is an absolute abstract thing to me. There's absolutely nothing that I can identify with in terms of Sauron. But I can identify with all the characters in the Bible. Like I said, even the most evil ones I can identify with, because I've seen myself go in that direction. Not fully sometimes, but I've seen my heart move in that direction where I'm like, so that's what I mean, is that it doesn't mean that Judas isn't evil. Of course Judas is evil, but I think that the way the Bible stories are told is that if you are subtle and if you're attentive, you can actually see why people are acting, even though we understand that what they're doing is wrong and evil. I don't know if that makes sense.
So maybe we can't understand Sauron, but we could understand everyone who sides with Sauron.
A little more, for sure. Yeah, you definitely can understand Saruman more, because it's like, obviously he wants power. He understands also, it's like, how this is going to play out. He's cynical about it. And so I think you can understand a little more, the characters downstream, for sure.
Zach, go ahead. You're next.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for speaking. So to slightly shift the conversation, I'm working primarily the medium of role-playing games rather than sort of prose narrative fiction, right? Like most people, I assume, here. And so it's an interesting challenge, because I think role-playing games are a very interesting space because it's communal participatory storytelling, right? But the problem is, like, how to integrate like valuable symbolic structures into sort of a narrative that sort of spontaneously but slightly under control, right, emerges. So I posted this longer version in the chat of my question, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this would be a question to talk about with
how to include it. I mean,
yeah,
the thing about this is the thing that happens in video games too, and role-playing games, is that when you create, especially like a role-playing game, like when you're creating a world, there's almost like a natural thing that happens where if the world is going to function, is going to be coherent, it's almost naturally going to move towards a type of balance. Because if it, especially in a role-playing game, if it's unbalanced, then everybody's going to play the mage, right? And everybody's just going to beat everybody other character. So there's something about a role-playing game which, in its very structure, has to find that these forces that balance each other, because or else the game's going to be boring. And everybody's going to know the trick. It's like, if I just play this role, this character, then I can just beat everybody. So I think that if you follow, and the people that have created the like Dungeons and Dragons and all these role-playing games, like, they're actually really good at doing that. Like, they've actually understood just the basic categories of humans and what it is that, like, the basic ways to do something, right? Let's say brute force, trickery, persuasion. And it's like, they've understood how things happen in the world, like magically, in the just the normal sense of what type of action do we pose to get things done. And then they've embodied that mythologically in the different character roles, and they've done a pretty good job. And so, we get caught up in the sorcery stuff or whatever, but if you understood the basic structure of a role-playing game, that you could say it's like that, what are the different ways that people get things done in the world, then you could make a role-playing game about all kinds of things where you would apply that. You could apply it to different forms.
Yeah. Well, actually, after seeing your video where you had mentioned, like, it's a great time for myth, right? Let's pull back and go back to these old myths, right, and retell them in this old new way, right? And you mentioned sort of the Arthurian stuff that's not really being done. And I'm like, whoa, Arthurian's like a great this, and you could make a system based upon like virtues as your stat, and you engage in conflicts with different virtues. I don't know. It's just don't want to get
Yeah, but I mean, it's definitely a possibility. The difficulty with role playing games, I'll tell you what I think is a difficulty is that it tends towards mechanics, right? It tends towards mechanical causation, because real magic, like in the sense of real transformation of the world, happens through real qualities. So if you want to be a thief, you have to develop certain qualities, and you have to be able to sneak, and you have to be able to hide, and you have to be able to be two-faced, and if you want to be a mage, you have to be able to be on, have to convince, and to let's say project a certain type of confidence and a certain type of, so it's like, and if you want to be a brute, then you want to be a barbarian, you have to have big muscles and be able to crush things, right? So that's an actual development of characteristics. The problem with the role-playing game is because you don't actually have those characteristics, then it becomes a kind of mechanics where it's like, it's numbers, and it's like, it's like, if I get these stats or whatever. And so there's a danger, of course. I mean, I think it's useful. It's not completely useless, but I think we have to be careful, because there is a tendency to limit, to reduce magic to, like I said, to basically mechanics. And then you get Harry Potter, which is like, you just have to learn to say the formula right, and like just manipulate this like mechanical object that's a wand right, and they'll be shooting lightning bolts. But obviously that's not what magic is, in terms of the ancient way of understanding it. So
Cool. John, go ahead.
All right. Well, Jonathan, so my question was, about 4 years ago, you did a series of videos, probably like 3 or 4, talking about like time devouring space and accelerationism and stuff. So my question is, have you been thinking any more about that with everything that's kind of gone on the last couple of years?
About how
Yeah.
how you could say that, well, it's mostly time devouring space.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, it's continuing apace. I think most people have noticed that things are just getting crazier. It's not over yet. We haven't reached peak madness. Like, it's coming. It's going to end in war. Just so you know. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to burst all your bubbles, but it's like, that's what this leads to, obviously. So but it's not over yet. We still have some little ways to go before things pop, and next year is gonna be crazy.
No, next year's gonna be insane.
Next year is gonna be an absolutely insane year. It's like AI in a U.S. election with like Donald Trump and basically the deep state, because Biden doesn't exist. It's like it's going to be, you guys, like, it's going to be so mad. And then like these crazy things, you guys saw the new president of Argentina. It's like things are getting so wild that it's hard to really, every time you think like things can't get any crazier, then it just happens, and then basically like the next AI is basically going to be Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy AI, which is the one Elon Musk is trying to launch. I mean, that's going to be things are just getting wilder. And whatever's happening at OpenAI, man, it's hard to know exactly what's going on there, but it's all scary. It's all like, we should all be very, so, there's going to be war. That's for sure. So
start writing, everybody, quickly.
That's right. I mean, but I know it sounds weird, but actually that's one of the things people need during war is stories. Like, that's one of the things we need. It's not superfluous, because war, especially now, war is all about story, and it's very much about information, and you can see it. I mean, the Ukraine war and now the Israel-Palestine war, it's just insane in terms of you can see the narratives. Like, you can now, before everything was a little slower and everything was a little, it's like, maybe you'd get some flyer, you'd hear an advertisement on the radio, but now we're just being shouted out from the two narratives, like at full blast, and you can hear both of the stories like fighting each other. And so
That's
it
never
makes
happened
you
before. That's never
exactly.
happened before.
So it makes you aware that what the battle is really a battle of stories. It's at first, before it's a battle of people on the street, and that if we can tell a better story, if we can tell more encompassing stories, then we're actually we're helping the world to heal, especially stories that epic stories that are capable of capturing the dignity of our enemy is something that is dreadfully needed now, and it used to be common fare. It's not like, anyway, so it used to be common fare to be able to portray your enemy as noble, but now it's like it's impossible. So we need stories like that.
Yeah. Cool.
Shaylin, you're up.
Thank you. I'm not going to put my camera on. It's 2 a.m. here. I'm looking very disheveled, but nice to meet you, Jonathan. Quick question about a fairy tale that I'm writing. It's kind of playing around with the concepts of disassociation and as people being two parts, so having our extrovert self and then our introvert self, and that inner part of us, which Thomas Merton also has a little quote about. The inner part is the hinge on which our outer part, the door, turns. And it's about two sisters who have to escape from their father, who turns into an evil fox, and he chases them into the woods. And the younger sister represents the kind of extrovert, spontaneous, taking charge of life, part of the self, and the older sister is the quiet, introvert, wise part. And to basically save the older sister, the younger sister pushes her into the well. Into a well in the forest, and then she escapes. Her foot gets bitten off, and she ends up falling down into the deeper part of the forest and loses her memory. So she forgets that she has this older sister. But I just thought it was really interesting that you were talking about Jesus at the well, and I just wondered if you could talk into two things. One, what does the well symbolize? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it's something to do with relationship, water, nourishment, but then it's also this dark place. And like in places in Portugal, kids have fallen into wells and they've sadly died and they've fallen very deep into the earth. So that picture of the well I'm trying to like figure out. And then another thing is losing memory. I don't know if you could say something about that, if you've got any thoughts.
Okay, so all of those things are related, and so in scripture, the well is identified with it's identified definitely with the feminine and the meeting of the man and the woman. And so the way to understand it is that water in scripture it's chaos and potential. Maybe that's the best way to understand it. So you have at the outset, you have the ocean, which is you can't drink, right? The ocean is just this like chaotic potential that you can't drink, whereas there is a form of there, and then you have what you call a spring, which is water which comes down, like it comes down from heaven, or water that comes down from heaven, and usually that's represented as masculine. And the well is something like the bound potential, useful potential. It's the sweet waters, right? It's so in the Old Testament, the salt waters or the bitter waters are transformed into sweet waters by meaning, by the cross, by the tree, by the connection between heaven and earth. Like that's what makes the bitter waters sweet. Now, the well, because it is, but you can use, it doesn't only have to be that way as the way it's represented in scripture. The well can be both the place of refreshment, because that's where you get the water and you pull it down from the bottom of the world. So it's like the feminine and the refreshment, but it can also be forgetting. It can be falling yourself in the waters is forgetting. That's what happens to Jonah when he goes down into the fish. He forgets for 3 days and then he remembers, right? And so you can say like the same thing happens during the flood, because at the end of the flood it says God remembered Noah, which means that God forgot Noah for a little while, at least in the story. Going into the waters is forgetting, and going down into the earth is dying and forgetting and all those things. So the idea of falling in a well and going down into the well can definitely be a type of forgetting. It can also be the thing is that it's complicated because you can also find potential there. So you can also have a magical world in a well.
Yeah.
Or you can have a magical world in a forest. So the forest and the well are actually similar in terms of their symbolism.
Yeah. Okay, sweet. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay.
All right, Joseph, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Jonathan, for taking the time. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to ask you about how you were conceptualizing creativity or inspiration from a Christian perspective. Seeing as we don't use like the language of the muses in the same way. And I think the answer you gave was something about how cataphatic, like creative content comes into the world somehow through like apophatic experiences of prayer or something like that. And then it becomes, I guess, more concrete, like as it goes further down. I could be misremembering. I found a similar idea in Olivier Clement at one point, who said that like the good art that was like in the West still was pretty much the product of like spiritual fumes of the prayers of the Middle Ages. But I'm curious, I've heard you talk recently more about mediation and things like this, and as you've been working on the fairy tales, probably you've been thinking more about imagination and its role. How have you been thinking about that lately? It seems like a lot of Orthodox people on the Orthodox Arts Journal, we use Ibn Arabi's language or borrow language from the Inklings, that all those traditions. Yeah. But not a lot, except for maybe St. Maximus coming from within.
Yeah, it's what's difficult. The difficulty, I think we've talked about this a few times. I don't remember if it was here somewhere around these discussions, is that the difficulty we have is that we have, on the one hand, in the Orthodox tradition, we have a very full cosmological creative language, which appears in the architecture of the church, the iconography of the church, in the music of the church, in the relationship between all these things, the vestments, all of this kind of glorious manifestation of God in forms that is obviously creative in that sense, in the sense that it is taking these higher principles and it's embedding them into reality. The problem we have is that a lot of our spiritual practice is based on monastic texts. And in the Philokalia, obviously everybody's heard this, that the imagination is prescribed. Like, you shouldn't imagine things, and that you should try to have pure prayer without image, to kind of enter into to access the light of God, right? To the divine light. So I would say that we have to just take those two testimonies together. We can't reduce one to the other. And we can't just say, well, the fathers say that imagination is bad, so therefore it's bad, so stop writing, right? It's like that kind of nonsense, right? But it's like, well, you know what? Hagiography is all over the Middle Ages. Poems are all over the Middle Ages. It's like no Christian ever stopped doing this stuff. Mm-hmm. So what are you talking about? Like, and so you have to just take the two. We have to understand, of course, the superiority of asceticism and the superiority of silence and superiority of stillness and the divine light, obviously, but then it comes back into the life of the church as all these glorious practices. Now, and it doesn't even mean that it's the same people that have to do one or the other. Yeah. You could even, like, cosmologically, you could say it's secretly thanks to those monks in a cave somewhere that I don't even know what their names are, that maybe I'm allowed to now take these stories and embody them into the world, right? It's like it's a mysterious process, but that's just how it works. So I think that that's the thing that now, but what it does, and what is difficult is that we don't have a very strong theoretical frame for how imagination works in the Orthodox Church. Doesn't mean that it hasn't worked. It's obviously it has. We just don't have a great theological frame, which is why people will tend to use Corbin's language hesitantly, and use words like imaginal and things like that. and not, but in Western Christianity, you'll have people invoking the muses until the modern world. Like, it's not like Christians stop invoking the muses. Like, read Boethius again, and
You still have people invoking the muses.
right, exactly. And so I think that we have to, we just have to understand that all these things coexist together in the Christian tradition. They don't, you can't reduce it to just one side.
There's something to say also about personal asceticism and the role of creativity in it. There's something that I read, and I don't have the quote on me. I'll prepare it at some point. But this was a book by Father Dimitris Staniloae, and he's quoting Saint Maximus the Confessor, and he makes the point that in Saint Maximus there's a sense of the progression towards perfection, and at a certain point that progression involves an asceticism from the self so completely that it involves everything, including the imagination. But he also talks about a restoration of those things at the far end of that renunciation, and that you pass through a kind of the valley of the shadow of death, right? This is the hero's journey, and you come out the other end and you get it back, and it's in a restored and purified form.
Yeah.
And this happened.
St. Gregory of Nyssa, it's there. It's St. Gregory of Nyssa, right?
And
it's that's what happens to Moses in his version, is that he goes through the divine darkness, and after the divine darkness, like beyond the divine darkness, then he gets the pattern of the tabernacle, which is basically a creative pattern of space and worship and golden things, like golden objects, and how to loop curtains to like the different poles and stuff. It's a very like, it's both very symbolic, but it's also very practical in the sense that they actually had to build that thing.
Yeah. And this rhythm, this pattern was enacted as recently as the life of Saint Sophronius of Essex, who writes about this himself, that he had to abandon his art, and he came back as an icon painter. And it wasn't just the fact of it being sacred art; it was the fact of it being art at all that was the important thing. So it's not that all Orthodox people need to stop doing secular art and only do icons. That's not the point. The point is that there is probably for everybody a period in which they have to renounce their gift for the sake of their spiritual life. But that's much different than saying, all imagination is evil. Those are, yeah. All right, Daryl, go ahead.
Oh, well, thanks for taking my question today. I'm pretty new to the whole writing conception process, Jonathan. So I guess if I could ask one question, it would be, so how do you deal with the little voices in your head, the self-critical maze that just seems to go on and on? I don't know if there's any magic formula to it or not, but how do you deal with some of that? Because I know you're creating something, but at the same time, you want to analyze it, but still not destroy yourself at the same token.
Yeah.
I don't know how you deal with that stuff.
So I would say the two things, one of the things we talked about already, which is the two sides, like one is a creative, one is a critical, and you have to separate those two. You can't be in those two modes at the same time, or else you're not going to be able to do anything. So you have to be able to be in the right space for creating. It's hard because I can't really tell you how to do it. I don't really know. I just do it. Like I also know, like, I can recognize the energy in myself. I'm not a very disciplined. I'm not one of those writers that like writes, from like 6 to 7, like so many words. I can't. There's no way. I recognize the energy that I have, and I kind of know when I can write, and then I'll write, and then sometimes I'll write for the whole day. Actually, if I'm in the right space, and I also know when there's no point. I'm just going to sit there in front of a blank screen, and nothing's going to happen. I also have I have the luxury of being able to do that, which is that I also am not a professional writer. I'm doing all kinds of things. And so, obviously someone who has to put out a novel a year or something, who's a professional writer, has to put out, has to write articles for a publication. It's harder for them. But the other thing I would say, Daryl, is distance. Like, I would say that if that critical mind starts to like go too much, like just move away and just like take a nap, or like just go away and do something else for a while, because, and then come back later, because sometimes you can start to spiral. And I think it's happened to all of us, where all of a sudden you're reading and you're like, nothing, all of this is crap. Like, everything I've written is crap. And like, what am I even thinking? It's like, this is horrible. And you read it and you're like, how did I write this? Like, this is so bad. Like, if you're there, you just have to step away, and then do something else, go jogging, or I don't know, like do something else.
Movement.
Yeah. And then come back later, because that can happen to everybody. Like, everybody has that experience. And then if you go into your text when you're in that mode, oh, then you're going to wreck it. Like, then you're really going to wreck it, because you're just going to start changing stuff randomly, and like, I just got to be a better writer. And then it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good advice. But yeah, movement is always excellent.
Yeah. Deacon Nicholas is good. He's got all those all that running and all those races.
That's the only way I stay sane.
It's amazing.
Otherwise I'd go insane. Well, thank you, Jonathan. This was lovely. Before I let everybody go, I just wanted to let you all know that we are actually opening registration for St. Basil's workshop in early January. So those of you who are interested, the very quick blurb is that, yes, this is the place where the next generation of Inklings is going to be made. So you definitely want to be there if that's who you want to be. And basically how it works is it's either an advanced beginner or early intermediate level workshop. This is not for people who are coming up with their first ideas. And we'll be able to tell, because the registration includes a $5,000, no, not $5,000, 5,000 word sample of either a completed work or an excerpt from a longer work, also preferably completed. And the reason that we want to do it slightly higher is because there's a lot of very good stuff for the beginner level, some of which I'm going to be offering fairly soon for my own audience, but it's a lot harder to get the kind of targeted, useful mentorship for people who are writing in this space for this kind of story at the level where they're almost ready to publish, and they just need that little extra push to get that structure both on the cosmic and on the scene level. That's exactly the kind of thing we provide. Paul Kingsnorth is one of our teachers. Jonathan's one of our teachers. Nicole Rokas, Catherine Hyde, fantastic writer and editor. It's a really good program. We had one complete cohort already, and we're just getting ready to open registration for the next one. So get your samples ready, start polishing them up, because in the first week of January, I'll be opening it up, and it's going to be very limited. It's 8 to 12 spots only. The point of this is small group, so that everybody gets to know each other really well. And we start with an in-person retreat, which is part of, I think the best part of it is people really make wonderful connections at the front end, not the back end. And then it just gets deeper from there. So that's my little plug for St. Basil's. Keep your eyes open for the announcement that's happening in January. Jonathan, thanks again. And everybody.
Thanks, Ed. This has been great. Great questions, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank
you for being such a lovely audience, everybody. It's very inspiring to see your faces, to see your eyes light up, and to know that we're not just talking into the void. It's a wonderful feeling. So thanks, everybody. And I will see you again, I'm sure.
All right. Bye-bye.